day, you guys. So I know I look a little crazy, but listen, let me explain a little something to you. This video we're doing today is unlike anything I've done before, and I have a few things to say before it gets started. If you don't want to hear what I have to say, I will leave a timestamp down below so you can fast forward just to get to the true crime story I'm going to tell you today. First and foremost, this case is bananas. This case fascinates me to my core. You'll find out why later. If you've never heard of this one, please stay tuned because it's a real head scratcher. This video series is something I came up with in my own little head about a year and a half ago. I even have the first original story I was going to cover. I was so excited about it, but I got so in my head and so anxious about it that I scrapped the whole idea, and I do this all the time. My goal this year is to never do that again. Bailey Sarain. I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. She is a bad bitch, a queen of queens, because she had this idea and she went out there and did it and made it happen. So she actually also has a very similar video series on her channel. I will link her down below. Go check her out. She is amazing. I just gotta give credit where credit's due because I actually didn't want to do this video series after I saw her starting it because I was like, I'm not trying to like step on anyone's toes or take anyone's shtick. If you know anything about me, I love true crime. My favorite podcasts are all true crime podcasts. I have just a wealth of knowledge of true crime, all things serial killers. It's just this weird little obsession I have. And I thought it would be fun to create a video series where I tell you a true crime story while I'm doing my makeup. I would love to do a makeup look that is somehow inspired by some element of the case. Now, that might not be able to happen every time. I'm not gonna lie. There's a few cases I'm trying to get my thoughts together on that I just don't know how I could pull that together. But if there is anything in the story that I could use to create a makeup look out of, I'm going to. And in this case, long story longer, the 6 years that we're gonna cover in this story takes place in the 80s, so I just felt like doing an 80s inspired makeup look. I had so much fun creating this. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. There will be more coming. Check the down bar for links to all my social media platforms. Make sure you come hang out with me on Instagram. Make sure you stay tuned to the end of the video where we break down all the theories in this case because I really want to know what you think. So let's just get into it. I'm gonna have a naked face in 3, 2, 1. All right, you guys, here we are. Let's get started. I do want to start off by saying that I will be looking at my phone. I have my notes right here. Also, this story, I had a very different opinion of when I first heard it. I had a lot of kind of confusion. I had never heard anything like this before, but upon closer inspection, when I was doing research for this happens. You'll see what I mean. So in 1989, the first episode ever of The Simpsons was aired. Popular films include the OG Michael Keaton Batman movie. Some of the popular musicians of the time were Duran Duran and Madonna. So in Vancouver, 1989, the body of a woman is found in the yard of an abandoned home. Nearby, her car was found. The woman in question had actually been missing for 2 weeks. It was theorized that this is suicide based on the nature of her death, but she was tied up. So it's kind of one of those things where you're like, how many people kill themselves and then tie themselves up? It gets stranger, don't you worry. The body belonged to 45-year-old Vancouver resident Cindy King. Police already knew who Cindy James was at the time her body was found, not only because she had been missing for 2 weeks prior to that, but because Cindy had requested lots of police interference surrounding a stalker that she had for 6 years. Now we gotta go back in time a little bit to see how strange this really is, so bear with me. So from what I can gather about Cindy's upbringing, it seems like she traveled a lot with her family because her father was in the military. So at 18, her parents actually got an assignment through the military to relocate to France, and because Cindy was 18, she was like, nah dog, I'm kind of tired of that, I think I'm gonna stay put now, and she actually began school. While she was going to school in Vancouver, she ended up living in dorm housing at the school she attended. All right, so Cindy's parents are in France, eating snails, living their best, and they get a letter from Cindy at some point while she's in nursing school. And in this letter, Cindy tells their parents that she's extremely distressed, distraught, and saddened by the recent suicide of her fiance. This is pretty shocking to her parents for the obvious reasons, but more importantly, because they'd never even heard of Cindy having a fiance. Her brother, who apparently she spent a lot of time with and visited her often, that she was close to, he would later go on to say he had never seen this fiance or heard about him before either. So flash forward a little bit to 1965, and Cindy is 21 years old. She has a chance encounter with a married man named Roy Makepeace, which, by the way, Roy Makepeace sounds like the name of, like, you know how there was Scruff McGruff, the crime dog, you know, Smokey the Bear? Roy Makepeace sounds like the name of some children's character that's used to, like, help bring about conflict resolution, right? Just me? Okay. But anyway, so he begins to tutor Cindy, and shortly thereafter, they begin having an affair. Who saw that coming? I don't know. Everyone. So at one of the earlier to mid-time months of 1966, Roy divorces his wife, and then by December of 1966, him and Cindy are married. Not surprisingly, Cindy's parents were not thrilled about the idea of their 21-year-old daughter marrying this 39-year-old man who had cheated on his wife to be with her. Later, Cindy would go on to read a note to Roy that she received from her parents, kind of outlining their concern, talked about how Roy was clearly taking advantage of Cindy, but in an odd turn of events, it would later come to pass that Cindy herself, in fact, had written that letter. So just so we're on the same page at this point, Cindy has made up a fiance and killed him off, and is now reading letters to her current husband from her parents that she, in fact, has written. As we all would, Roy kind of thought this whole situation was a little bit strange. But he also felt like, okay, well, she's a 21-year-old girl. She probably just kind of likes a little bit of drama in her life, and he just tried to move past it. Cindy kind of took on this very kind of weirdly limited, very sort of selfish perspective on their relationship, or at least the way that she described it to other people, I should say. It seemed like a lot of the things that she said about Roy didn't make a lot of sense, or would actually kind of come out to be completely untrue. She would say a lot that Roy was very neglectful of her, and Roy would say that Cindy wanted nothing to do with him. She would also tell people that Roy was abusive towards her. Roy later did go on to admit that he did at one point slap Cindy out of just complete and utter frustration with the kind of stuff that she was doing. Now, obviously, don't be slapping people, no matter how frustrated you get. Like, control yourself. But there seemed to be no real proof or even admission on his part or anything that suggested he was, in fact, as abusive as Cindy was saying that he was over the years. So in 1982, after Cindy and Roy had been married for 16 years, they divorced. This would be the first time in Cindy's entire life that she has ever lived alone. She was 38 years old at the time. You know, she literally went from her parents' house to a dormitory to a husband. Not long after Miss Cindy moved out on her own, she's starting to voice concern and complaints to people close in her life that she thinks she has a stalker. On October 7th, 1982, Cindy said that she received the first of many threatening, obscene phone calls. She said that the person on the other end knew her name and spoke with a very raspy voice. The threats usually had some sort of sexual tone to them as well. She was understandably creeped out, as we all would be, but she said that the calls continued for a few days after. I'm just playing this off my phone, and I'm holding my phone up to my lapel mic, so hopefully you can hear it. If you couldn't tell what that said, the person is saying, "Cindy, dead meat soon." And I don't know about you guys, but to me, off the jump, that sounds like a woman. So that was from a voicemail that, I keep calling it voicemails, that was from an answering machine message she had. So on October 12th, which is 5 days after the very first phone call she receives, she actually calls the police. The police come and check everything out, and they feel like there are no signs to suggest that anything is out of place, anything has been disturbed, but they do recommend that she starts to keep a log of the phone calls. Okay, I had to take a phone call, so I like did my hair. I don't feel like I did a very good job, but it's fine. So my initial plan was to have like a faux 80s perm situation, but my hair will not hold curl the way that I want it to, so I just put it up. So at this point, Cindy has been told by the police to start keeping track and keeping records of the phone calls that she is receiving. After police interference, it is said that the frequency and the intensity of the harassing phone calls picks up. So Cindy had called and talked to the cops on October 12th. 3 days later, on October 15th, she is returning home from dinner with a friend. They find her front door open and one of the windows broken. Her pillows are slashed on her bed, and a key to the front door is left on her nightstand. Shortly after that, she started receiving letters, and the way that they were written, have you guys ever seen a movie where they have a ransom note and they like take letters out of a magazine and cut them up and stuff like that? She started receiving threatening letters that were done in that type of ransom note style. She ends up befriending a cop named Pat McBride. He had been with the force for over 8 years. He took a pretty special interest in her case and obviously Cindy, because he ended up moving into one of her bedrooms. Now, I think it's really strange that a cop who is involved in this case in any way would live with her. I've never heard of anything like that before. So while he lives there, her phone line gets cut. Some of you young kids might not know what this actually means, but we used to have house phones. It was like a cell phone, but it couldn't leave your house. I'm just kidding. I'm sure you guys know what a house phone is. But once again, the cop is already living there. So some people would argue that it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense that the behavior would escalate so much while a cop is present in the home. And I would say that's probably a good point. But later on, McBride would find a pair of wire cutters that he owned left out on top of his toolbox, and he would go on to say that he didn't recall there being a recent time that he had used them. So roughly a month after the phone line situation took place, police found Roy Makepeace kind of posted up behind Cindy's home. Roy would go on to tell the police that he was there because he wanted to protect Cindy, but also went on to say that Cindy did not know he was hanging out behind her house. For me, if you know that I'm in fear of my life from a stalker and then you just go hang out behind my house without notifying me whether or not your intentions are there to protect me at all, like, aren't you afraid you're gonna give me a heart attack if I see you back there? At some point, Roy asked Cindy to move back in with him for her own protection. After Roy asks Cindy to move back in and she declines, she decides instead to move away. So shortly before she's getting ready to take off, her friend Agnes, so Agnes is going to come up a lot in this story. Agnes finds Cindy passed out at the bottom of her basement stairs. She was cut 14 times and was bleeding badly. When Cindy was later asked about her attacker, she would go on to say that she didn't get a good look at the person at all. The general consensus was that Cindy was holding something back. This is something that seems to come up time and again with this case. I believe Cindy's mother would later go on to say that Cindy herself had told her that she just couldn't be honest about what was going on. It seemed like Cindy told her mom something to the effect of like, I can't tell you the full story. I can't tell you exactly what's going on because I'm afraid for you. But police would also later go on to say that that was the sensation or the feeling that they got from Cindy was that she was always holding something back. Now, I will get into theories about what that thing might be later, but keep that in mind. Cindy would go on to say the attacker had told her that if she tells anybody anything, they will harm her friends and her family. So Cindy at this point is obviously afraid for herself as well as her loved one. So here's where things get a little weird. So Cindy has police surveillance on her 24 hours a day for a few weeks. And in that time, the harassment seems to completely stop. So after police detail has been relieved, the harassment picks right back up with threatening phone calls and letters. In 1983, after a year of harassment, Cindy decides to move to a smaller house closer to her job. She was a pediatric nurse, from what I understand. It seems like at some point after the move, she went on a vacation, like took some time for herself, and then in that time before she returned back to work, the harassment seemed to stop pretty much completely, but that would not last. In October of that year, Cindy would find sorry cat people, a dead cat on her yard with a note attached to it on a string that said, "You're next." Understandably so, at this point, there is no doubt in poor Cindy's mind whatsoever that her life is very much so in danger. So around this time, Cindy starts working with some sort of like personal security guard detail by the name of Ozzy Cabin, or I don't know how to pronounce it, I'm sorry. Apparently this wasn't his first rodeo. He had done some pretty high profile gigs protecting celebrities and royalty. So obviously she thought this was the man for the job. You know, this has been going on for, at this point, a couple of years, and there seems to be no sign of being able to track down the person that's doing this to her. But even Ozzy could not protect her. Ozzy had set up like a two-way radio system with Cindy, kind of like a walkie-talkie situation, because she had been having issues with her phone line being cut. Now, I can't remember, honestly, if it happened more than once, but we do know that it happened once. As a safety precaution, she had been given a radio. Also, he set up a panic button in her house as well. Lots of measures are being taken to give Cindy the opportunity to get help if anyone else tries to harm her in and around her home. So one night, apparently, Ozzy's trying to get a hold of Cindy on the walkie-talkie radio. He's not able to make any contact with her at all, which is unusual. So he heads over to her house to check on her. And when he gets there, he's knocking on the door. Nobody's answering. He lets himself in and he finds Cindy on the floor with black stockings, like pantyhose. That's what the Southern people call it, pantyhose, around her neck. And there's a paring knife. So there's a paring knife stabbed through her hand, like so, and there's a note kind of like pinned to her hand with the paring knife. And the note says, "Now you must die." Again, Cindy does not know anything about her attacker, can't remember anything, has no information to give, but once again, there seems to be people who think that she is hiding something. So around this time, and once again, understandably so, Cindy has a breakdown. You know, she has been harassed. She has been going through the gigs. People cannot help her. There is nothing that seems to be done. They're no closer to catching this person. She's checked into Lionsgate Mental Health Facility under an assumed name, and she spends some time there trying to work through a lot of the post-traumatic stress that she is dealing with as a result of her harassment. So Cindy is in Lionsgate for about a week and is released to care of friends and family. They feel like she's kind of got a little bit of a better handle on her stress level with this. And of course, once she gets back out into the real world, she is met again with more harassment. On December 5th, 6 miles away from her house, Cindy was found in a ditch, almost in a hypothermic state, half naked, wearing one man's work boot and a rubber glove. She had a woman's stocking, wrapped around her neck again. She was beaten, she was covered in lacerations, she had a black eye, and there was a needle mark on her body, as if someone had tried to inject her with something. And once again, she had no memory whatsoever of what had happened to her. So at this point, as I said, she has moved away from her home in Vancouver, and I think she lived in Richmond at this point. Richmond police contact Vancouver police, and it seems like the two police forces came to the conclusion that after everything they've seen and after all these attacks and after no evidence or proof to substantiate anything that Cindy is saying, that Cindy must be the one doing this to herself. With all of this that's going on, the police are just kind of over it. So if you remember Agnes, she's married to a guy named Tom, and Agnes and Tom would come and stay with Cindy in her home from time to time just to kind of keep an eye on her and make sure that she's okay. Late one night in April, Cindy and Tom are upstairs in the home and they hear a strange noise coming from downstairs of the home. They get downstairs and they realize a fire has been set in her house. Now, later on, supposedly, once an investigation was done, there was no evidence that anyone had broken into the house. Like, even on the windowsills, for example, none of the dust had even been disturbed to suggest that someone could have gotten in through the windows. There was no sign of forced entry on the doors. This was all very suspicious. When they go to call the fire department, they realize that the phone line again has been cut. But not only that, the wire to Ozzy's installed panic button had also been cut. So Cindy and Tom run outside. Apparently some neighbors call the cops and the fire department on their behalf. And while they're out there waiting, Cindy and Tom were waiting for the cops to arrive. Cindy appeared very calm, very composed. But that when cops got on the scene, that's when she kind of started acting erratic, hysterical, and really afraid. And to everyone that saw this happen, they found that to be a little bit suspicious. Once again, investigators believed that Cindy had something to do with how the fire came to be started. So Tom and Agnes just kind of felt like it really was pretty much impossible that Cindy would have been the one to start this fire with them in the house, because they just felt like there was no way that Cindy would ever do anything to put them in harm's way. So after the fire situation, Cindy is hospitalized again with severe depression. Understandably so. She was soon transferred to a better facility capable of conducting a further psychoanalysis of her. You guys, I have to read this off my phone because I don't want to say anything wrong, but she was diagnosed with hysteria, paranoia, schizophrenia, psychopathy, and hypochondriasis. She was released 10 weeks later, and the harassment would begin again shortly after. On October 26th, the panic button was pressed again. She was found hogtied, half naked, and kind of like half in, half out, you know what I mean, of her car. Once again, with a stocking around her neck. Don't mind my passionate display of frustration via my blush brush. And yet again, she had absolutely no recognition of how she got there. An expert was brought in. They kind of confirmed that there was no way that she could have tied that particular knot. And even still, police didn't believe her. After that, the alarm would go off a few more times, and police just, at that point, were done with it. They wouldn't give it any credence at all. But the harassment would continue to go on for another 3.5 years, finally culminating in a tragic and horrifying end. Before we wrap this up, I gotta turn the camera off for a second, do my lips because I can't talk while I'm doing them anyway, and then I'll be back to finish this bad boy up. Hopefully we're not at minute 50 of this video, so if you're bored, stay tuned. Hopefully I'm gonna bring this thing home. So this is definitely one of the crazier looks I've ever done on my channel, but I really like it. It was super fun to do. So we have now reached the day that Cindy's dead body is found. It is May 29th, 1989. Agnes was going to Cindy's house for a planned bridge game, and when she knocked on the door, nobody answered. Cops were called, everybody looked around, could not find her anywhere, but in fact her abandoned car was found in a grocery store parking lot. It was very clear to everyone that she had been in the car recently because there were fresh groceries in the car, as well as a banking stub showing that she had just deposited a paycheck. There was blood on the inside of the driver's side door. Her purse was found dumped out with contents underneath the car. Obviously, everyone immediately started looking at Roy for information because he was the main suspect the entire time when it came to her harassment. His alibi was rock solid, though. It didn't seem like there was any attempt made whatsoever to conceal her body. body. As stated in the beginning of the video, she was found with her hands and feet bound. She had overdosed somehow on some sort of morphine-based drug, and there was a needle puncture wound on the inside of her arm. Similar to the way an expert was called in to kind of assess the scene where she was left hanging out of her car hogtied, they wanted to see whether or not she would be able to tie this knot as well. If you recall, the first time this happened, the expert said she would not have been able to, I keep saying not, and it's like funny. She wouldn't have been able to tie it. This time they are saying that she would. Now, it's a little bit confusing because the idea is that if she had ingested this morphine, whether it was intravenously done via the puncture wound that we see on her arm, or if she took them orally, it's hard to understand how she would be able to do anything after that, because the amount that was found in her from toxicology was like 10 times the understood lethal dose for someone her size. And the coroner would go on to say that this is an unknown event that led to her death. That's a very odd thing to put on a death certificate when, by all accounts from the police and everyone else, it was an apparent suicide. There's never been any other evidence found, no fingerprints, no DNA, nothing. Once again, the main suspect is Roy Makepeace, but unfortunately, like I said, there's really nothing to substantiate that, to include the fact that on the days and times that she was attacked during her harassment and stalking, he had a solid alibi the same way he had a solid alibi on the day and time that Cindy would have been abducted and then later murdered. So the only other obvious suspect in this situation was Officer Pat McBride. He's the cop that I said just kind of like moved in with her randomly during the beginning of her harassment. Apparently this was a romantic relationship, and Pat McBride did propose to Cindy, and apparently she declined. The relationship ended amicably, and they ended up remaining friends. Cindy was already being stalked when she met McBride, so I don't really know how believable this is, unless it was just some weird perfect storm of like, she's being stalked and then Pat McBride comes in and decides he wants to harass her and drive her crazy as well. Like, I just don't know how likely that is. But it would explain how, you know, the perpetrator that is stalking her would be aware of things like when police surveillance is happening and when it isn't. It's been suspected that it wasn't just McBride that was doing this, that it was like McBride and several officers on the force were doing this to Cindy, but I don't know. I'm not saying it's impossible. I just feel like that doesn't seem like, what would the reason for that be? Are people on the police force in Canada just so cruel and have nothing better to do that they're going to construct this elaborate stalking scheme on this poor woman and drive her insane and then murder her and dump her like, I don't know how much I buy that. So as I said in the beginning of the video when I played that voicemail, I can kind of glean that what we're hearing is a woman's voice. Now, a lot of other people think the same thing, and as a result are kind of leaning towards the idea that maybe Cindy had some sort of relationship with a woman that would have taken place shortly after her and her ex-husband split up, and the stalker was in fact a woman the entire time, which to me makes the whole nylon stalking element to this all the more sinister. It was almost like if this was true. I don't feel like I've ever seen anything that said they were Cindy stalkings or not, but I don't know. That doesn't seem like something a man would do, especially because the stalkings were never actually effective in doing anything. Like, she was always found with them wrapped around her neck, but she survived. Or even when she had passed away, the way that she died was not through strangulation with the stockings. Things like poisoning are very poisoning, if you will, which I understand an overdose is not the same as poisoning, but if you kind of get where I'm going with it, that's a very female crime. Another reason people feel that it might be a relationship with a woman is that in that time and in that place, you know, we're not in the 2019 of now where we're a lot more accommodating, understanding, respectful, and open about LGBTQI relationship. She might have been ashamed, and that could have been part of that whole thing where people felt like she was holding something back. Now, I can't imagine a scenario where even in the worst of homophobic climates, that if I was being attacked regularly and my life was literally a living hell for 6 years, that I would still keep that to myself because I don't don't want people to know I'm in a relationship with a woman. So there are two final theories. One of them is that Cindy suffered from Munchausen syndrome. If you guys are familiar with Munchausen by proxy, it's kind of been in the media a little bit more lately with shows like Sharp Objects and The Act. Munchausen syndrome is when it's just one person involved. So if you have Munchausen syndrome, instead of making somebody else sick, you would make yourself sick in order to get that type of attention or financial gain or whatever the case may be. So a lot of people thought that Cindy was doing all of this on her own, and if you look back to her past, those few incidents where she would do things like make up a fiance dying or create conflict between Roy and her parents unnecessarily through a fake letter, like that kind of stuff seems a little bit possible. The other suggestion is that Cindy had DID, which is dissociative identity disorder, commonly referred to as multiple personalities. Now, here's my thing with that. It's not that I think it's impossible. It's just that I've heard lately that it is so rare, so incredibly rare. Some people in the mental health field themselves don't even know if it's real or not. Now, I'm not saying I'm an expert. I'm not saying everybody's coming out and saying that, but I have heard where it's just so rare, incredibly rare. Cindy did spend some time in mental health institutions during the 6 years that she went through this, and I just can't imagine if she had symptoms or signs that is something she was dealing with, that the specialist wouldn't be able to pinpoint that. I'm all over the place with this one. Like I said, this case is crazy to me. When I first heard it, I was like, this goes all the way to the top. This is a conspiracy. The cops are involved. Her husband's involved. They're working together. But if you guys are familiar with Occam's razor, it's a philosophical concept that states that the most likely explanation for something is probably the right one. And in this case, honestly, the more information that comes out about it, the more it just seems like she was suffering with some sort of Munchausen syndrome. Now, that's just my perspective. She has family members who have come out and said things like that's not possible. Ozzy himself said that in all the time he was working with her, he found absolutely no evidence to support that she was doing this herself. I just don't know what kind of amazing like criminal mastermind would be able to pull this off for 6 years, attack her multiple times, and then not get caught, not even get close to being caught. Like I said, my theory is my theory. I would love to hear your theory down below. And there's one more thing that I would like to point out about this case that does make even my theory kind of get blown up. Her body, where it was found, apparently it was so poorly concealed. Didn't seem like any attempt had been made to hide the body. In the area that she was found, the place that she was found, it was very unlikely that if a body had been there for 2 weeks that nobody would have seen it. So a lot of people believe that was a dump site. The interesting thing about this that I will say, this is not the only case of something like this happening. I have found at least 3 other cases similar to this. Isn't that crazy? When I read this stuff, I was getting goosebumps the whole time. Anyway, that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I cannot wait to make more drop dead gorgeous movies. I can't wait to make more of these videos. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you guys are having an amazing day. Make sure you subscribe. If you are not, check the down bar for links to all my social media platforms. Leave me your theories, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.